Welcome to the self-directed learning module on simultaneous shifts. In this lecture, we will talk about how the price mechanism works to allocate scarce resources in terms of single shifts. Here, single shifts refer to either the demand curve shifting or the supply curve shifting. We'll also look at, in the cases of simultaneous shifts, meaning both demand and supply shifting at the same time. Before we go into single shifts and simultaneous shifts, we must understand what is the definition of a market. A market is defined as an arrangement where buyers and sellers can negotiate in order to exchange goods and services or factors of production at an agreed price. And a market equilibrium in this case means that it is the point where quantity demanded is equivalent to quantity supplied. A market will be in equilibrium if there is no tendency to change. The equilibrium price in this case means that it is the price at which quantity demanded is equivalent to quantity supplied. There is no tendency to change the price once it is in equilibrium unless demand and or supply conditions change. So what this means is that in this diagram, where demand curve cuts supply curve or intersects with the supply curve, the equilibrium price is determined at price P and the equilibrium quantity is at price Q. This equilibrium will remain unless there are changes in demand and supply conditions. So when I say there's changes in demand and supply conditions, that means either demand has changed or supply has changed or both. And this can be a result of a change in non-price determinants of demand or non-price determinants of supply or both. So in this case, point E will be the equilibrium point. Now in this table in your lecture notes, basically this shows the market demand and the market supply for packets of coffee per month. And you notice that at the price of $1, the quantity demanded is actually 28, while the quantity supplied is 1. What this means is that quantity demanded exceeds quantity supplied at this price of $1. This means that there is actually a shortage of 27, and because of this shortage, there is actually an upward pressure on price. And similarly, at the price of $2, the quantity demanded is 24, the quantity supplied is 4, and again there's a shortage of 20, and again because of this shortage there will be an upward pressure on price, and you can see that this is the case for when the price is $3 as well. But something interesting happens when the price is $4. At $4, the quantity demanded is equivalent to the quantity supplied, which means that actually there's neither a shortage nor a surplus. And because there's no shortage or surplus, there's no pressure on prices. But at the price of $5, something interesting happens as well, because in this case, the quantity supplied is 20 units, but the quantity demanded is only 9 units. What this means is that there's actually a surplus, since quantity supplied exceeds quantity demanded. And in this case, because of this surplus, there will be a downward pressure on price, and the same thing happens when the price is $6. So the price of $4 is the equilibrium price, and the equilibrium quantity is 14 packets of coffee. Diagrammatically, this is how we see the equilibrium, where demand cuts supply. Let's examine what happens if quantity supplied exceeds quantity demanded. Let's say the price is at $5. We will see how this $5 cannot be a price that remains. It will re-equilibrate at the equilibrium where demand cuts supply. Let's see how that works now. At the price of $5, you notice that the quantity supplied is actually 20 units, where the price of $5 cuts the supply curve. However, consumers are only willing and able to consume up to 9 units, which means that in this case, there is actually a surplus. This surplus will generate a downward pressure on prices until prices re-equilibrate at point E at the price of $4 at the quantity of 14 units of coffee. Now, similarly, let's examine this opposite situation where quantity demanded exceeds quantity supplied. At the price of $3, the quantity demanded is actually 20, the quantity supplied is 9. Now in this case, quantity demanded exceeds quantity supplied, which means that there is a shortage that exists in the market. Because of this shortage, there is actually an upward pressure on prices until prices re-equilibrate at point E at the price of $4 and again at a quantity of 14. At this point in time, you need to take note that surpluses and shortages refer to quantities, which means the difference between QD and QS and not the area. Now let's look at single shifts. So when there are changes in demand holding supply constant. If there's an increase in demand from DD to DD prime, you will realize that there will be a shortage at the initial price of price P. How do we see this happening? The original price and quantity is at P and Q1 right now, but the increase in demand causes the demand curve to shift rightwards, and at this original price of price P, you notice that the quantity demanded is actually Q2. We will now look at the new demand curve because demand has already increased. It does not make sense to look at the old demand curve anymore. However, the quantity supplied still remains at Q1. What this means is there is actually a shortage. And again, based on what we have learned just now, a shortage actually causes an upward pressure on prices. And as prices go up, quantity demanded will fall according to the law of demand. And as prices go up, quantity supplied will increase according to the law of supply. The fall in quantity demanded and the increase in quantity supplied will adjust until quantity demanded is equivalent to quantity supplied at P prime at Q prime. So basically the three stages are, number one, you need to identify what is the initial equilibrium and what was the change in the demand or supply condition. Number two, you need to talk about the price adjustment process. Then number three, you need to talk about where the new equilibrium is. Now let's look at what happens when there is a decrease in demand. So similarly, we'll look at the original equilibrium, which is at P and Q1 right now. Because of this decrease in demand, you realize that demand shifts leftwards to DD prime. At the original price of price P, now the quantity demanded is at Q2. No longer at Q1 because demand has fallen. So we will look at the new demand curve, and where it meets the original price of price P, you realize that the quantity demanded at price P is Q2, but the quantity supplied at the original price of price P is Q1. In this case, there is a surplus because quantity supplied exceeds quantity demanded. Now, do you still remember what this surplus will do to pressure on prices? That's right. There will be a downward pressure on prices, which in turn will lead to an increase in quantity demanded, which means that Q2 will increase, and there will be a fall in quantity supplied due to this fall in price according to the law of supply, which means that Q1 will fall until they both meet at the new equilibrium of P prime and Q prime. So again, the three steps are as you see in the screen right now. And the summary is that the fall in demand will cause a fall in price and a fall in quantity. Now let's look at changes in supply, holding demand constant. An increase in supply from SS to SS prime creates a surplus of Q1 and Q2. How do we see this? The increase in supply will cause the supply curve to shift rightwards. And at the original price of price P, you notice that the quantity supply is at Q2. That's right. And the quantity demanded is actually at Q1. So in this case, do you get a case of shortage or a surplus? It is actually a surplus because quantity supplied exceeds quantity demanded. There will be a downward pressure on prices as per usual, and this adjustment process will continue until the new equilibrium price is established at P prime and Q prime. So again, the same three steps. And the summary is, if there's an increase in supply, that will lead to a fall in price and an increase in quantity. Finally, what happens if there's a fall in supply? This is actually a checkpoint for you to check if you understood what I've been talking about so far. So my explanation here will be a bit short. The explanation, you should know it by now. The decrease in supply from SS to SS prime will create a shortage. So you see that SS prime has shifted leftwards and the shortage is Q1, Q2. You should be able to figure out which quantity represents quantity demanded and which one represents quantity supply. Then because of this shortage, there's an upward pressure on prices, which I will not show you on the diagram. But once the adjustment process stops and the new equilibrium is achieved, you should realize that the increase in price is to P prime now, and there's a fall in quantity to Q prime. So the summary is the fall in supply causes an increase in price and a fall in quantity. This is a self-assessment for you to consider what will happen to either demand or supply. This is a poster that is published by AirAsia. What will happen to the price and quantity of AirAsia flights? Now, if you notice, the previous poster is clearly a jet at Tiger, right? Which means that this, as an advertisement campaign, is meant to affect the taste and preferences of consumers towards AirAsia flights. In that case, that means that the demand for AirAsia flights will increase and cause the demand curve to shift to the right. So diagrammatically, again, it's the same process. Demand curve shifts to the right, and you notice that initial price or price P, there is a shortage because quantity demanded will have been greater than quantity supplied. I will leave you to figure out where QD and QS is on the diagram. This shortage will cause an upward pressure on prices until the new equilibrium is achieved at P prime and Q prime. So basically what we can conclude is that when either demand or supply changes, we are certain of the effect on equilibrium price and quantity. But you notice that when both demand and supply changes, meaning when we have simultaneous shifts, we will not be certain of the effect on both equilibrium price and quantity. The effect on either one will be certain. That means either equilibrium price or quantity, we will be certain of the effect, but the effect on the other will be called indeterminate. Indeterminate also means uncertain. We will see how this plays out in the following scenarios. Now, imagine if there is an increase in demand and an increase in supply at the same time. There could be three possibilities. Maybe the increase in demand could be proportionately more than the increase in supply. So what this means is that demand shifts to the right. This is the original equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. Demand shifts to the right. And because demand increases proportionately more than the increase in supply, I will draw the increase in supply shifting to the right, but by a smaller extent. So you notice that in this case, I've exaggerated the extent of shift of demand to clearly show that it is shifting to the right by a greater extent. And you notice that the equilibrium price and quantity is now both higher. But clearly, you can think of two other situations in this case, right? Because it need not be certain that demand will increase proportionately more than the increase in supply. Definitely, there could be a situation whereby demand increase proportionately lesser than the increase in supply. So what this means is that demand will still shift to the right, but this increase in demand is less than the increase in supply, which again, I've exaggerated the shift of. So again, you see that in this case, prices are now lower, but quantity is still higher. And finally, the last scenario that you can think of is that both demand and supply increases in the same proportion. So what you can do is to draw a demand curve shifting to the right and a supply curve shifting to the right by approximately the same extent. You need not use a ruler to measure this. But you notice that in this case, prices would remain constant. P prime and P in this case is exactly the same, but quantity would still increase. So you notice that when there's an increase in demand and supply, the impact on quantity is actually certain. We are certain that regardless of the extent of shifts of demand and supply, quantity will definitely increase. But the impact on equilibrium price is actually indeterminate or uncertain. Why? Because it depends on the extent of shifts of demand and supply. Now, if you turn to page 32, page 33, and page 34 of your lecture notes, you'll notice that these demand and supply diagrams are actually blank. All they have is actually the initial equilibrium, and it's actually meant as an exercise for you to draw the situations that is depicted on page 32, 33, and 34. So on page 32, we have a situation of a decrease in demand and supply. So both demand and supply will shift leftwards. But again, in this situation, there are three possible scenarios. If demand decreases proportionately more than the decrease in supply, this is the original equilibrium. Demand will shift to the left and supply will also shift to the left, but by proportionately less. And you notice that my fall in demand is so much greater than the fall in supply. And the impact on P and Q is as such. But if demand decreases proportionately lesser than the decrease in supply, this means that the shift in demand is by a tiny bit, but the leftward shift of supply is by so much more. And again, the impact on P and Q is as such. And finally, for the last scenario, if demand decreases the same proportion as the decrease in supply, they will fall by roughly the same amount and prices will remain the same, but quantity will still have fallen. Now, do you still remember what is the overall impact on price and quantity across all three scenarios? Which one is the one that we can be certain of? That's right. You realize that we can be certain that equilibrium quantity will definitely decrease, but equilibrium price is actually indeterminate. Now you can take some time to complete the diagrams on page 33 and 34 and compare it to my answer right now. On page 33, we have an increase in demand and a decrease in supply. The diagrams that you should have drawn is this. And the conclusion that you should be able to draw is that equilibrium price will definitely increase, but equilibrium quantity is actually indeterminate because it depends on the extent of shifts of the demand and supply curves. Please take note that in this case, because we are talking about increase in demand and a decrease in supply, you have drawn a rightward shift of the demand curve and a leftward shift of the supply curve. Then finally, our last situation is a decrease in demand and an increase in supply. And your answer should be as such. And you should be able to realize that the equilibrium price will definitely decrease, but the equilibrium quantity is actually indeterminate. Now, is it true that there is no scarcity when market equilibrium is achieved? Actually, no. When the market equilibrium is achieved, only shortages or surpluses are eliminated, as what I've shown you so far. The central economic problem of unlimited wants and limited resources still exists. As what I mentioned earlier, the market equilibrium will stay until demand and or supply conditions change, which means that the factors that will cause any market to be in disequilibrium is actually the fact that when there's a change in demand and or supply due to non-price determinants of demand and or supply. How does the market re-equilibrate? This is via the price adjustment process. So if you remember, prices will act as signals to both consumers and producers to adjust quantity demanded and quantity supplied accordingly until they are equal, until the new equilibrium is achieved. The invisible hand, if you remember at the beginning of this series of lectures, the invisible hand was mentioned by the father of modern economics, Adam Smith. And basically, it is this idea that when there's a change in prices, consumers and producers will pursue their own self-interest and increase and decrease quantity demanded and supplied respectively, which will cause a new equilibrium to be created. It is as if consumers and producers are led by the invisible hand to a new market equilibrium. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this lecture. You should be able to complete section A of your demand and supply tutorial now.